With the release of Zenless 2.0 being right around the corner, I asked you guys what major changes would you like to see coming to the game. This is because it's the perfect time to start discussing the future of Zenless and the implementations we would like to see during the 2.x life cycle. The dev team has been very open with wanting strong feedback for the game in order to improve the overall player experience, and they've proven this is something that they truly want to do, as we've already received many great quality of life features throughout the game's first year. So in this video, I'm going to be going over the top 5 changes we need in Zenless Zone Zero, and this will be including some of the feedback that you guys presented as well as some of my own requests. To start, let's begin with the biggest feature we need as soon as possible: equipment loadouts. This is a feature that is basically necessary in Zenless right now. This is because over the course of the year we have received so many new drive sets and W engine for characters to use that it's becoming harder and harder to keep up with every piece of gear we have. The community has also gotten very experimentative with builds, and we found out that so many different pieces of equipment work well with units. For instance, a lot of our supports were originally using a swing jazz set when the game released, but ever since Astro Voice dropped, this has been the new popular set to farm for them as well. Both of these sets are very good, and one can be better than the other depending on their environment and overall team build. So because of this, it will make the player experience so much better if we just had a feature where we could save the builds that we have for our characters and just be able to easily equip whichever one we want with just a click of a button. This would just make building characters less of a headache, while also potentially making players more inclined to experiment with more builds. Overall, it would just be a great feature that every player would enjoy and benefit from, just like the character plan feature has helped a lot of players build units since it was introduced back in 1.4. For our next big change, we need disk drive rerolls. This is another massive quality of life feature that would make farming and building characters so much better for players, and there's a few ways that they can go about this. For starters, they can allow us to change our main stat on our drive disk. There has been plenty of times where I would get godlike substats that I could use for my DPS, but then my main stat ends up being HP. Because of this, the piece ends up becoming useless because no character in the game really benefits from even having HP as a main stat right now. So if they give us the opportunity to at least change the main stat on the drive disk once, I think that would be a very welcoming change that every player will love. Now, I definitely expect a feature like this to use some form of currency, and I'm fine with that as long as that said currency is easy to obtain as a free-to-play player, and you at least give us enough every week to reroll the main stat on 1 or 2 drive disks. That way, it could allow the system to be somewhat efficient while making players feel like their character builds are improving over time. We should also be able to use our tuning calibrators with this feature so that we can guarantee the stat that we want to reroll on. I think this is fair because we'll be spending a very finite resource that only has but so many ways to obtain currently. Now, if they don't want us to be able to reroll our main stat, at least let us reroll our substats, and more importantly, specific substats. I know we all have that piece that gets really good crit rolls or attack, but for some reason right at the end we get 2 points into HP. Let us take those 2 points into HP and reroll it to get a chance to invest into an already existing stat on the disc, or let the HP stat be rerolled entirely in general. I don't expect us to get both of these as an option, but one of the other could work. I think rerolling a substat would definitely be much more of a headache than rerolling a main stat for players though, but it would still be better if we had this feature rather than not. Shoot, in a perfect world, it would be great if we could reroll both main stats and substats, but if I'm going to be honest, that's really wishful thinking. Hopium, if you will. Next, for our third change, buffs need to be properly displayed in combat. This is something that some of you might not deem as major, but I believe this will drastically change how you understand Zenless as a game. What I mean by this is that when in combat, players don't always understand why they are doing specific things. This is because the game isn't always relaying the proper information that you need, causing you to become focused on trying to clear but not understanding what needs to be done to clear. The primary culprit of this is not knowing when buffs or debuffs are active from characters' drive sets. We have lots of sets that are triggered when players perform a specific action in combat. For example, with Protopunk, your team receives a 15% damage buff for 10 seconds when any squad member triggers a defensive assist or evasive assist. This is a pretty good buff, but the issue is that the game doesn't tell you when this buff is active. So as the player, you have to internally remember when you trigger said buff and know when the cooldown is over while fighting against boss mechanics. This is something that's pretty challenging for most players to keep up with, and shoot, sometimes it's even hard for me to keep up with. So to help with this, I think they should treat gear buffs similar to character effect buffs by adding some form of indicator on screen to let players know it's active. This will help players take advantage of the things that they are doing in fights a lot better, and even point out some things that they might be messing up on as well. Now when implementing this, they also need to clean up the UI a bit so it doesn't become cluttered or confusing when buffs and debuffs are active. We want to be able to provide players the information that they need while also not overloading them during combat. This is a delicate adjustment that I don't exactly know how to do or how it will look, but it does need to be done as players have made complaints about the UI itself feeling overwhelming, especially when they haven't played the game in a while. This would be a very welcome change that I think everybody would enjoy and like. It doesn't seem like it's a massive change, but it would be very important. Next up, we have access to more resources. Currently right now, I think it takes way too long to fully build a character due to the amount of resources that is needed for them. A lot of the times you have to dedicate majority of a patch to farming the resources that you need for one character, making it hard to catch up most of the agents that you have to a similar level with one another. Because of this, I think one of two things should happen. Either we start consistently receiving more resources to properly build our characters, or the amount of resources needed to build them should be cut down. Either one of these will be great changes since it'll allow players to get to the main thing they want to do faster, which is play their new units. Most players don't really enjoy the process of building characters because of how tedious it is. They only do it because they have to in order to get to that end result, so the primary goal for the developers should be to reduce this downtime to increase player enjoyment. Zenless right now is a game that releases a lot of characters on a regular basis alongside the new equipment, and I feel that the amount of time that it takes to build units should properly complement that a bit better. The game should feel less like a chore in some cases, and the more we tone down those chore-like activities, the more fun players can have with the game. I think the gameplay loop for Zenless is strong enough to keep players interested and coming back on a regular basis that we don't need all of these tedious things to keep the player numbers up. This will continue to help make Zenless feel more and more like an actual game than a gacha, and I feel like right now that is really appealing to a lot of players in the space because that ultimately means that their time is being respected, which for the most part I do think Zenless already does a pretty good job at that. Finally, for my fifth option, we need some more training mode improvements. We received a few quality of life changes for the training mode in Zenless that has made it a good tool for players to use for understanding their units and rotations, but it has been a while since we had a major update to it. So I believe it's time we get some more crucial features added to it by making it an even better resource than it already is. For starters, all the enemies in the game need to be accessible in training. We've had so many new enemies released in Zenless over the course of the year, and I don't think the enemy list in training mode has been updated once. This is an issue for players because that means we don't have any way to learn how certain enemy mechanics work without playing that content that contains them. I think this kind of sucks for the most part because it doesn't provide players the proper time and environment to truly learn patterns and understand why they may or may not be clearing. I think updating this enemy list would actually resolve a lot of issues players have with in-game enemies because it'll be a lot easier for them to understand where they need to improve at during fights. Another thing that will help them improve is being able to manually activate or deactivate buffs and debuffs. This is something that probably seems small, but it actually helps labbing characters' kits and builds a lot easier and faster if we can just manually control buffs being applied without having to worry about cooldowns. Definitely a setting more so for advanced players, but also a great resource for creators to use to help players better understand how things work. We also need to be able to change gear in training mode. It feels very tedious to have to exit training mode just to make gear adjustments on a character. It honestly feels like this is an oversight in some cases because we can change and adjust our teams and even look at the gear on our characters while in training. So it feels like being able to adjust our gear while viewing it shouldn't be too much of an ask in my opinion. This isn't a major change we need, but it'll definitely reduce the amount of screen transitioning we'll be doing if they do implement it. And finally, I think the last setting we need for training mode is input display in history. This is a feature mostly presented in fighting games, but games like DMC5 has input display as a feature in its training mode as well. Having this feature makes it really easy for players to understand what inputs are being performed and is displayed on screen. We kind of have an input display now in the game currently, but it's not the greatest as it that only recognizes certain actions. I think it's important that all inputs are recognized on screen so that when players are being taught how to execute certain actions with characters, it's less confusing on what's being done because they can just see it on screen. This is also why input history is an important feature as well, because players can then go back and see what inputs they performed to understand maybe why certain moves didn't come out or how they performed an action they didn't mean to. These are overall just great implementations for training mode, designed for it to be an even more reliable resource than it already is to help players learn more and more about the game. And besides that, that's all the new changes and features we would love to see come to Zenless during the 2.x development cycle. I don't expect all these changes to happen, but I do hope some of these are implemented as the overall intention is to just make the game more enjoyable for players. This is something that the dev team is always striving to do for Zenless, and I think presenting information like this could help them achieve that goal so much easier. I tried to be as realistic as I could with the changes presented because we want to aim for things that are actually reasonable for the devs to potentially do. There are some changes I could have requested for and even listed for you guys, but I knew overall it would be pointless in just me yapping. I do have an honorable mention though that I think is possible. I just didn't include it a part of my top 5 because it's not super important, and that's implementing an immersion mode. This is basically a feature that's designed to remove all HUD information on screen so players can become more immersed into the game in itself. Think of it by making the game feel a lot more dynamic. It's overall just a fun feature to have so players can admire how beautiful of a game Zenless is while also being able to take some really cool screenshots of characters in the world. I got this idea from the camera event we had in Zenless a couple patches ago, and all it made me do is wish we had access to a feature like this everywhere we are in the game, while also making the feature even better. Like, not only would I love to see it in combat, but I would also like to use it in the agent menu because characters do so many cool poses, and I would love to grab better screenshots for thumbnails to show off how goddamn cool these units look. It will also be cool if we had like a replay feature so that we could take even better screenshots or maybe even record for a more dynamic perspective. I think this is something that a lot of players would actually enjoy because one of the main things I see players show off on social media all the time is the cool wipeout shots that we get when clearing content. This is also a feature in other gacha games like Woo, so I can imagine our players would enjoy it just like a lot of the other community. Again, this isn't a super important feature that I would say we need immediately, but it is something that I do hope we get down the road. Other than that, that's everything that we have for today's video. You guys let me know in the comments down below, how do you feel about the changes and features I presented? Also, let me know what are some more changes you would like to see come to Zenless. I don't speak for everyone in the community, so it's important that you voice your opinion on the matter in order for the dev team to get a better idea of what they should improve on. But enough of me yapping, I'ma let you guys go and enjoy the rest of your day. I appreciate you guys and all your love and support. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Join the Discord if you haven't yet. And remember to believe in you that believes in yourself. I'll see you guys in the next one.